Welcome again to Trust Talks, a series of leading-edge conversations about telecom security, featuring me, Patrick Donegan, with Harden Stance, and the team at AdaptiveMobile Security, which today is presented as last time by Head of Marketing, Graham Coffey. Graham, how are you doing?
Not too bad.
Good to see you. And also, we're joined today by John Kennedy. Nowadays, John is Director of Pre-Sales Engineering for AdaptiveMobile Security. But if you actually go back a few years, John was one of the co-founders of the company. John, nice to have you with us.
Hey, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. So we're going to stick with much the same format on this occasion that we used so successfully last time. We're going to start off with a little bit about AdaptiveMobile Security itself. Graham's going to give us a little bit of an update on the company and what it's been up to. Some new product releases, I gather. Second, we're going to talk about the convergence of telco and enterprise security with 5G. So just how different is cybersecurity done in a mobile operator today compared with, say, a bank or an automotive company or a retailer? To what extent should that change, alter, or even converge with 5G? And if it should, why? Last, we're going to wrap up with a few thoughts on some important bits and pieces of news from around the telecom security world over the last few weeks. We're going to be touching on some things like Singtel looking to sell Trustwave. We're going to be looking at how Samsung is doing in the 5G networks business, which has security implications, of course. We're going to be looking at the arrest of some scammers, SMS scammers in the UK quite recently, and just how big of a deal that is or not. But let's start now with Graham. Graham, over to you and some news about AdaptiveMobile.
Thank you, Patrick. Hello again, everyone. I wanted to spend just a few minutes and share some company updates. Many of you will have noticed our recently updated website. We have added lots of new great content that I would encourage everyone to explore at their leisure. The observant amongst the audience will have noticed the addition of some new 5G security products. And we've released details of a trio of 5G security platforms. These platforms extend our security portfolio deep into the core 5G network. The platforms include enhanced security edge protection proxy, security communications proxy, and the vertical industry API protection platform. So these allow the security capabilities really to be deployed within the 5G network to protect against internal security threats posed by threat actors who have been able to infiltrate the networks and slices themselves.
The vertical API protection platform, Graham, unlike the other two products you mentioned, that doesn't sound to me like a sort of 3GP specified element. It sounds like something that's unique to AdaptiveMobile. Can you just tell us what that vertical API protection platform is?
Yeah, sure. So with 5G, there's lots of interactions with enterprise applications through the edge communications platforms, the edge compute platforms, and they communicate with the 5G slices or the core of the 5G network and services using an API. And obviously that API interface and access has to be protected as well. So it's a new ingress and egress, I guess, point into the 5G network that we obviously need to ensure the security is maintained.
And the SEP and the SCP, I think certainly that the SEP is heavily roaming dependent. So is it a reasonable assumption that great to have the SEP and the SCP generally available, but probably not for deploying much for the next 18 months or so?
Definitely. And the SCP, I think, probably is a solution that will be required first as the carriers and mobile networks start to see slices being adopted and maintaining that internal security. As you rightly pointed out, the roaming aspects of the SEP will be a later development once the kind of the core networks start interworking and roaming subscribers on the 5G services for those. So yeah, definitely a medium term roadmap for us.
But needless to say, great to see network protection, interconnect protection in right at the outset of 5G, rather than trying to bolt it on as an afterthought with 2G, 3G, and 4G.
Absolutely. I think the time has come to learn from what has happened with the previous generations. So it's great to see the focus being on kind of how these services will be secured and protected.
Right, and this is a cloud native release, I take it. You're first in this area.
Yeah, so the technology is based on our Release 8 platform, which is our first cloud native security platform. So this allows us to interwork with all of our existing security products and services as well, and to do the correlation not only within the nodes in 5G, but also between 4G and 5G as vendors deploy kind of the dual mode deployments and basically mix and match the coverage with 4G and 5G. We'll be able to kind of interwork our security platforms in the same way, providing the protection as those architectures develop. And cloud native really is becoming the kind of the go-to technology from a cloud hosting perspective for both the network infrastructure, but also the security platforms themselves.
Right, fantastic.
So lots of new acronyms for us to remember going forward. So thanks for that brief introduction, Patrick, and over to you for the rest of the agenda.
All right, thanks very much indeed, Graham. That was terrific. So to today's main topic, the convergence of enterprise security and telco security. Now, when I think of bringing an enterprise perspective to 5G, I think of a few things. I think, how does the common practice in enterprise security differ from how mobile network security is done in the telecom sector today, and what can we possibly learn from other industries? Obviously, IT and telecom, different protocols, although we are obviously converging in many respects, including in 5G with, for example, HTTP2. An easy one, I suppose: no large enterprise worth its salt would leave its connection to the outside world unprotected by a firewall today. But actually, many telcos are still doing that, leaving their interconnect unprotected today. You might have thought we could learn a little bit about that from the enterprise world. Enterprises also make extensive use of managed security services providers, MSSPs, who are focused on nothing but security. In the telecom sector, we tend to do things either all ourselves or actually not do them at all when it comes to security. So is it at all possible that we can learn from that and maybe learn what the MSSP model has to offer us in the telecom sector? Second thing I find myself thinking is that best practice enterprise security is focused on protecting, detecting, and mitigating against the threat posed by attackers moving laterally within IT domains and also between IT and OT domains. It's what we've seen in so many high-profile attacks, attackers establishing an initial foothold in this part of the infrastructure and then moving laterally into another part of the infrastructure. It's precisely in those seams between those networks, between those domains, that attackers are able to have their most effective success a lot of the time. What that requires, I think, and hopefully you can see that from the slide that's upcoming here, is that I would argue we need a much more joined up approach to security that spans all of an organization's domains. Today in the telco environment, the IT security folks and the telco security folks don't actually talk necessarily all that much. I wonder whether we could learn from best practice in enterprise security to recognize that needs to be more of a priority. Third way that I think of the relationship between the enterprise security world and the telco security world is in relation to things like network slicing. And I'm not really convinced that telcos have really gotten all of this, their heads around all of this just yet. I think if we want to go executing on some of the exotic 5G use cases that we're talking about, some of the critical industry use cases in particular, I think we have to recognize that at the table is going to be the enterprise CISO for that organization. That enterprise CISO is going to have very specific views, very specific requirements as to how security is done in that network slice environment. And he or she is going to be having very, very significant influence, not just on how that business case moves forward, but actually whether it even moves forward at all. The position of an enterprise CISO is going to be, well, look, I get to have visibility into my AWS cloud. I get to have visibility into my Azure cloud. I get to have integration of what goes on there in my overall security environment, in my SOC. What can you give me by way of visibility into my 5G cloud, Mr. Operator? What can you give me by way of integration into my SOC, Mr. Operator, so that I can actually see what's going on there? So I think those are some of the issues I see when I think of trying to understand the relationship between enterprise security and telco security in the mobile 5G environment. John, let me ask you, how much, if any, of that made sense to you?
Yeah, Patrick, you highlighted some key aspects of and differences of telco versus IT security practices there. And it really points to the need for broader security governance across the telco organization. The protocol differences is one major factor that explains why operators have historically tended to build and manage security themselves based on onboard capability of their proprietary equipment as it came out of the box from their equipment vendor, or not to do much of it at all, as you said. So the move to all IP-based protocols and interfaces in 5G helps the convergence of IT and telco and allows telcos to apply, or will allow telcos to apply, future-looking, to apply more mainstream cybersecurity practices and products. I just think what telcos have been really great at doing so far is building massively scalable, reliable network accesses and services. But the security strategy that has been mostly based on strict infrastructure access and change controls, or a closed garden model perhaps, whereas 5G low zero trust model, more similar to IT contemporary practices with the introduction of SEP firewall towards other networks and the usage of OAuth inside the core network for authorization is where we see things going. Taking a moment to think about the subscriber customer-centric view, the scenarios like the ones we work with in the control plane and SS7 and diameter, I think that demonstrates what you were saying there about the silos, that within each silo there can be threats and attacks that can go undiscovered for periods of time. And even when they are discovered, they're not shared outside of the core network team, and the broader organization never gets to see them or understand them. So going further and going forward, it's likely that if we can provide greater insight in that the organization can learn what the individual subscriber impact has been from these activities and plan mitigation for them. As it stands today, it's unlikely that an individual subscriber would ever find out the activity that's going on the core network pertaining to them, and mitigation is not really considered part of the telco responsibility today. So how do you move from there to a model that puts subscribers at the center of the security frame? And that's exactly what, as you were saying, enterprise customers, enterprise CISOs will expect as they embrace 5G. To compare to the way enterprise security has evolved, they are able to correlate threat event information from all of the sources across the enterprise into SOC functions and run centralized functions like SIEM, intrusion detection, and device user plane monitoring. So there is a need for broader security governance and a holistic approach to join up the siloed parts of the organization we see, possibly under a CSO function that can have meaningful visibility into the silos of core, access, and transport to bring them to a par with current IT practice. And yes, I think you're right, enterprise CISOs will be uncompromising when it comes to demanding visibility into their 5G slices and the inter-slice shared core interactions.
It's interesting what you described there, because in a way what you've described is a really quite advanced and sophisticated enterprise IT SOC environment with advanced detection response functionalities, and a considerably more naked mobile operator environment is what you appear to have described there. Is that what you've described?
Yeah, I think it is. The treatment of security in telcos has been, I think it's handled in departments, in silos, as we just talked about, and the people in the adjacent silos don't always understand what's going on, and there's maybe no systematic or automated. There are no systematic or automated programmatic interfaces between the two that let them look on a daily basis whether things have got worse, got better, or how many incidents are being tracked or investigated. So yeah, I think there are some, we observe some quite manual driven processes to look into threat events within certainly some of the customers we deal with.
So how might you expect the so-called TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures of attackers to be able to change and exploit the 5G environment compared with what they've been able to do with 4G, John?
Yeah, that's a key point, Patrick. Thanks. So, the service-based architecture is a completely new network concept. So it's throwing up all sorts of challenges, and just learning, coming to grips with the service-based architecture is where everybody is just now. In all but the experts, we're all running as fast as we can to try and get up to speed on the new technologies, the new acronyms, just getting to understand where those seams are between the systems that are going to lead to the vulnerabilities and the security challenges. But let's take a step back. I mean, we can't just jump in and look at the pure 5G environment, new vulnerabilities, without remembering that as MVNOs move to a 5G core, we have to assume they're going to continue to support all the legacy or many legacy pre-5G functions in their own network. So MNOs will still have to support interworking with roaming partners that don't yet have a 5G core and that supports 5G roaming. Not every MNO worldwide will move at the same speed. So in this mixed architecture where some elements are 4G and some are 5G, interworking functions will enable communications across the generations. Now 4G doesn't have a slicing concept, so how will slicing security be dealt with? For example, slice-specific service authorization when the 4G interworking function converts communication from that 5G slice to the 4G network, and vice versa. So there's some quite big fundamental questions and scenarios to look at there. So security challenges through legacy interworking have to form part of the assessment. And we've published a paper on this for those of you who want to look more into this. Moving on to 5G and slicing. The existence of new entities, slices, within the MNO network can cause several security model implications. So in the past, MNOs were probably less concerned about activity leaving their network, as they would assume that was all good, and traffic received from others is where the suspicious traffic is. However, as we covered in our research, with a set of new slice instances within a network, an MNO may need to monitor much more closely whether rogue slices may exist within their network, as they could send traffic outwards that would damage the host MNO's reputation, as well as directly affecting other MNOs and other slices. And then lastly, we have to recognize the increase in complexity that 5G heralds, both in intra and inter MNO communication. So 5G is several times more complex. The progress from 4G to 5G represents a massive increase in protocol complexity. And our analysis shows that there are nearly 5 times as many types of commands, messages that can be sent inter-MNO over 5G compared to 4G, and over 3 times as many information attributes sent inter-MNO over 5G compared to 4G. So this has security implications because every single one of these commands needs to be inspected and many elements approved to prevent illegal or unwanted activity to be sent to and from a network. And this becomes more difficult the more commands and information element types are received. So between legacy interworking and new 5G use cases and increased protocol complexity, there's a big learning phase ahead for all of us in the actual threat identification to get to the understanding of the TTPs we face. And already our research has led to the identification by Adaptive of a malicious access to different slice by modifying slice differentiator vulnerability, on which we made a disclosure to the GSMA recently. So this is just one example. Others will follow, but as always, there will be more that only get discovered through operational experience.
All right, thanks, John. That's great. So now, in terms of the monitoring, threat detection and response tools, what is the, let's not talk about, whether you do it yourself, whether you get it done as on a managed model. Let's just talk about the core tool set to start with. What is the primary tool set needed to adapt and make this new environment safe?
Yes, Patrick. Well, unsurprisingly, what I just described as the main areas requiring assessment maps closely to where we see the need for monitoring and threat detection response. And those are the interconnect, both 5G and legacy, and importantly, the internal interslice and shared and non-shared functions communications. So the interconnect monitoring in 5G is specified in 3GPP as the SEP, or Security Edge Protection Proxy. Our strategy is to enhance the SEP functions analyzing the N32C and N32F traffic with security functions from our current 3G and 4G signaling monitoring to provide inter-protocol correlation, which we are calling ESEP. Secondly, for the monitoring of communication between shared and slice dedicated network functions, and also for the protection of non-shared network nodes, we'll employ an implementation of the 3GPP SCP node, which will allow us to sit on the SBA bus and see all the traffic that we need to see to enforce security zones, to enable security slicing on information element level, to filter API usage of signaling, to do load monitoring and management and interaction correlation with our other 5G security nodes. And we'll call this ESCP, E for enhanced. The last part of the monitoring we see as necessary is a specific API protector for individual verticals, making use of the network exposure function, or the NEF. So for example, an MNO might have a partner, let's say a logistics company, and they want to track their trucks. Then that logistics company should only have access and be allowed to request the location via this API for their own subscriptions, but of course should not get the location of any other subscription. So there needs to be a filter sitting on the APIs for this kind of use case that will be common in supporting IoT and MEC applications. And we'll be calling this vertical API protector. The detection capability will be, as we know, a synthesis of rules enforcing what we know should never be allowed, enhanced with the real life scenarios that we get from our actual deployments experience. And lastly, from research and events correlated across our deployments, as we know from our experience with signaling to date, that the combined data set always leads us to discover new indicators of threat, which we can use to improve our detection. Response is about how we alert and present these events to our customers. So there we employ our own implementation of reporting, threat exploration tools, as well as SDKs to export all the security event data to SIEMs within the SOC.
So I think you said you call it an ESEP. Everybody else has a SEP. You have an ESEP. What's the E bit, or is it? So it's not. I don't think the E part is any of the functionality you've described, is it, or is it? Did I miss that?
Yeah, the E part, the enhanced part, is the fact that we're building on our existing architecture, where we already have cross-protocol correlation, and we're enhancing the 5G SEP with protocol correlation into the legacy environment on 4G.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And
That's
so what about, I mean, the network exposure function is one of the kind of crown jewels of the 5G architecture, as it were. It's key to getting that engagement and access to core network services from third-party partners. What are you hearing from operators in terms of their readiness, their state of readiness to go opening that up? Because on the one hand, it's a fantastic opportunity, but obviously the security folks quite rightly look at that opening and go, yikes, don't they?
Yeah, and it's amazing. We've actually validated the vertical API protector concept with a few customers who've even, in the first meetings with them on 5G, they've almost the first thing they'll put up on the whiteboard is the NEF, right, and then the API, and draw a little box and say, "Could we have something here?" So, right. I think it's maybe it's I don't know if it's surprising. I don't know the standards inside out to say if, whether it should be there or not, but it does resonate with customers when we talk about it, and it's something that we've been asked for independently of us putting it forward as an idea. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one to develop with customers.
For sure. Well, now let's get on to what I think is really interesting, which is this whole question of the mobile network core environment, and this intensive monitoring as a platform for detection and response and all that good stuff. And then the notion that a mobile operator, if it doesn't have the capabilities to do this themselves, may actually want to source it as a service, for example, from AdaptiveMobile Security. This really, as we've discussed, in enterprise security land, that's mundane. It goes on every day. Doesn't really happen in the telco world. How do you see that appetite for an operator to consume that, and the readiness of the financial organization and the operational team to adapt to that way of doing things?
Yeah, well, Patrick, we have long experience of this. Coming from product company background, we're well used to telco's attachment to CapEx-based purchases with perpetual licensing and annual support and maintenance contracts. And there must be good accounting tax reasons for this that I don't pretend to understand, but it's still a clear preference in many customers we work with. In fact, even when we presented recently a managed service strategy to somebody and quoted for 5 years, they asked, could they buy it as a CapEx license? So that speaks to the speaks to the attachment to CapEx. And I think the CapEx big ticket purchase does a couple of things that don't always give good outcomes either for the customer or the vendor. It usually means a long procurement process and negotiation, and vendors often have to agree to non-standard features, bespoke developments, and once those are delivered, there's a cost to maintain them from one release to the next, which is onerous for vendors. And we've been in many RFPs where the product requirements have become so bloated by multiple committee stages of review that they become almost unbuildable. Mm-hmm. Now, the flip side of this is operators feeling they're locked into a particular vendor because they have invested so much in meeting their exact requirements. To repeat such a project would be expensive and onerous. Now, the MSSP model breaks with this thinking. So each party is thinking we can sign this for a year or 2 years, not make a large CapEx outlay. And if we want to move vendor, we can do that sooner. So we would certainly welcome the shorter sales cycle in exchange for the slightly shorter commit, as in we know we're in this for 2-3 years, but it might not be forever. So the MSSP model would support that. And certainly cloud native deployment should align with this time frame shift. It should shorten project deployment timeframes. We used to make a standard assumption of 8 weeks at the start of every project for hardware delivery and cabling and racking and all that stuff. This has shrunk with virtualization, but with cloud native, we should be deploying our software within days of agreeing designs using Kubernetes and Helm charts. So as a business, we welcome the move to OpEx/MSSP model and forecasting recurring revenues. Of course, it doesn't always mean the operator will want us to manage the full MDR cycle. Right. So we have models that deliver OpEx licensing plus level 2-3 support, and then MDR is a separate subscription on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, you'll know the story of MSSPs of yore. You know, everybody as an MSSP wants to sell a ton of software and be very sparing in the number of human beings that it throws at the problem. How far are you in terms of understanding the economics of that? And very particularly, the key always seems to be ease of use for the customer. Solutions that are easy to understand, easy to adopt themselves, easy to understand themselves, so that you're not getting inundated with ticketing requests, right? So how far are you down the road in sort of arriving at an optimal way of managing that?
Yeah, well, we have 18 years of experience on the business of deploying and supporting our products in all regions. So operationally, we have that as a really important building block in the business. But in the last 8 years or so, we've introduced managed services to help our customers get the most out of our products. And first, we did this with messaging abuse. We built a new architecture to give us capability to monitor traffic from multiple customers in a centralized way in what we call our security centers. We created a team of analysts we call the Threat Intelligence Unit, who are dedicated to service delivery. Then, when we extended our services to signaling threat monitoring, we used our Sigil Intelligence portal to enable us to monitor threats across all of our customer networks from a central point. So today, I checked this before we spoke, we have 50 active managed service subscriptions across messaging, or more than 50 across messaging and signaling. So that's more than half of our customers taking some form of managed service from us. So it's become a really important part of our business, and it's been quite a big transition for us. So yes, I can say we're well down the road to be able to deliver our products and an MSSP model to support them. But it's really important, as you said, to understand the resourcing model and how this scales, because you need to have an idea of how much time each customer requires to get the costs and resourcing right, so you can price it correctly, and also know how to ramp up as the deals come in.
So I hear what you say, John. I hear that you've been offering managed services in the mobile core space going back a few years. But let's be honest, that what you're referring to there is only in the kind of messaging space, which is pretty nichey and it's pretty mature. What we're talking about with 5G is a whole bunch more protocols, a whole much more breadth of detection and response required for a whole bigger breadth of threats. So how does that fit with your perspective on things?
Yeah, I'll take that, Patrick. It's fair comment. That's the majority of it. Yep. And it's taken us longer to get traction with signaling threat monitoring services, we call it. But we do have a couple of significant customers for that now. And it's probably more in customers where we see them adding a layer between above the core network engineers, who are in many cases the only real experts in the company that we could interface to, but where we have another set of people in the SOC or running in a CISO organization with analysts who are looking at signaling events and threats on the network. That's where we're getting the best traction of adding our expertise on top of their expertise to help them get a better visibility on signaling threats as they happen using our technologies. So we're making progress in getting good at capturing all the info we need about security incidents in an easy to understand way, and good specific guidance and follow up and mitigation. So we're still learning how to do this well, but I think we've come a long way and are ahead. We'll always say we're ahead of the competition. So we do have hurdles of working with some of the operators' working practices in terms of just getting access to the nodes and permissions and getting access quickly enough, because sometimes there's procedures about requesting access or subject controls. You might not have full UI access, or increasingly data privacy is another area that can be really tough for us, because just there's such a sensitivity about taking data out of the core network. Even once it's obfuscated and encrypted and anonymized, there's still a lot of concern. And sometimes we get caught up in long discussions about data governance, GDPR, data privacy laws, and storage, encryption, all of these things. So there's a lot to understand about being an MSSP for something as sensitive as the core network. I agree.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you. So let's conclude with the last segment, which is what else is going on out there. I have a few bits and pieces I'd like to share with you, but in the first instance, John, there's been news recently about a bunch of spamming gangs being rounded up in the UK. Is this interesting, important, unimportant? Do we care? What do we think?
Yeah, well, I suppose we have to say it as being good news that law enforcement have managed to close down a pernicious scam gang. Operators were mentioned as having collaborated with law enforcement, which is great. They're helping to close down this. I suppose what's disappointing is that from our point of view as a technology product company, the technology to stop this kind of campaign, spam campaign, smishing campaign, has been around for a long time.
Right.
So you really have to ask, why is that technology not in there to prevent this becoming such a newsworthy item? It should be stopped on a routine basis every day, and we do this with other customers around the world. So I think there's room for improvement.
Yeah, no, very good point, nicely made. A few thoughts to share with you as to some of the things I've been seeing. I thought it was interesting, particularly actually in the context of today's conversation, that Nokia announced their new XDR and MDR capabilities a couple of weeks ago, including for the first time for use in public cloud. They seem to be targeting a somewhat similar market to AdaptiveMobile, which is kind of interesting. Certainly using the same language, although there are obviously, I think, difference in some of the product emphasis. I thought it's interesting to have a quick think about what Samsung is doing in the mobile network space. Obviously, from a vendor supply perspective, telcos do not want to be locked into an Ericsson-Nokia duopoly. Samsung is the most credible, in my opinion, third-party, third trusted end-to-end 5G systems vendor. They're making decent progress. They announced just in the last A couple of weeks, a deal with Vodafone in the UK. They've announced Verizon, Singtel doing incredibly well. My one reservation about that momentum is, are they just cherry picking? I mean, because they're taking down some pretty amazing lead telco names, but are they just cherry picking? If other telcos come to them that are not quite as massive, will they get supply from Samsung in the same way as the big boys, would be a question I have. Great to see, as I've discovered recently, the work of the Metro Ethernet Forum, which has gone from standardizing carrier Ethernet to SD-WAN, now to SASE, Secure Access Services Edge, and Zero Trust. Really great to see them helping to do standards that are providing a tighter coupling of network and security. I think everybody would agree in the cybersecurity world that vendors are talking past one another in terms of SASE and whether it's a product, a framework, a service, or an architecture. So I think any standards effort that is in the business of making normalized language to enable people to know what they're talking about, and particularly to enable buyers and vendors to know what it is they're each talking about, I think is very, very welcome. I think that's a great thing to see. I noticed recently that Etsy have just released the first security standards for MEC, which is obviously very, very good indeed. One might say it's been a while coming. Then again, the whole of MEC has been a bit of a while coming, let's be honest. And then lastly, interesting to see that Singtel is considering selling Trustwave, the MSSP that it acquired a few years ago. That doesn't seem to have been a terribly happy investment, hence why they're considering selling it. In terms of the conversation we had earlier on, I do think it is interesting because I would argue that Singtel probably tried to run before they could walk. The Trustwave MSSP business was all about serving enterprises that had precious little to do with Singtel. And actually, in trying to be a focused MSSP in a way that wasn't significantly tied to their core telco business, doesn't appear to have been terribly successful. So I would draw from that yes, telcos need to invest more in terms of security tied to the services that they provide, not so much taking a leap into being a focused MSSP where they don't have any telco services footprint worth speaking of. So those are my random thoughts, gentlemen. Any thoughts on those, either of you?
I think the Nokia announcement is really interesting. It certainly is a trend that we're seeing from our customers as well, in terms of curating lots of different security and information intelligence sources into, I guess, an actionable service in there. So yeah, definitely something we think will be very, very vital in success of 5G and delivering 5G slices in there. And with the Metro Ethernet Forum team, you know, they will undoubtedly play a big role in the kind of enterprise 5G deployments, connecting campuses or connecting offices or different parts of an organization's private network. And it's positive to see them taking security seriously at the outset, and can only be a good thing, I think.
Totally agree. Anything to add, John?
Yeah, I was just on the Singtel selling Trustwave. Yeah, as you pointed out, if you go and buy a business and if there's not a synergy back to your core competence, then why would you expect to do a great job of it? I think perhaps more interesting forays into that by telcos would be good examples. AT&T cybersecurity, when they picked up Alien Vault a couple of years ago, they've used a kind of product-led strategy rather than just an invest and let it run strategy. So I think, you know, that's an interesting example of building a core competence rather than just investing in another business. And
yeah, a lot of those folks at Alien Labs ended up pretty much leading the whole of the AT&T cyber business, as I understand it. Yeah. Interesting acquisition. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, John, Graham, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure chatting to you both today. Thanks so much, Patrick. And thank you very much indeed for watching Trust Talk. This has been the second episode. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope that you'll enjoy joining us the next time. Thanks very much.